Okay, I'm recording, and let me fix something right quick. Um, okay, there we go. All right, how's it going, everybody? Just want to make sure that all right, yep, okay. How's it going, everybody? My name is Mark. I don't want to be too long, but I'm sitting here. I was running signal from the board from my keyboards to the gear so I'm labeling. My patch bay wasn't labeled, um, and my patch bus wasn't labeled. So now I'm actually labeling my patch bay because I forgot. As I bought more stuff, I forgot what was hooked up to what. I knew a majority of what was hooked up, but some pieces of like, okay, I would plug in, not realizing actually was a preamp when it should have been a compressor or whatever. And it was only, I was trying to make room in the patch bay. When really, I try to keep all my compressors in one patch bay, all my EQs, and then the other patch bay and so forth. But it is what it is. So anyhow, my name is Mark. Thanks for watching the channel. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Hit the bell. It should let you know when I post a new video. And of course, definitely write some comments. I did have a request. Someone wants me. I did talk about the music industry a little bit. Someone wants me to talk about the catalogs and stuff like that. So I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that in my next music business artist video. But for this video, I want to talk about 3 pros and 3 cons to doing a studio like mine, where I have a console, outboard gear, and even got some external recording devices other than just my DAW and plugins. And so this video is going to be called Pros and Cons of a Hardware Recording Studio versus a hybrid or in the box. Now, there are really, I think there's only 3 pros and 3 cons, how I look at it. It could be a lot more pros and a lot more cons than this, but I might throw in a few extra pros and cons if I think of it. But the first, I'm going to talk about the cons first of hardware gear. The first con is space. Because when you start buying gear, like a console, racks of gear, and this all is in one room, but it's tight in here. So it's like space. You could run out of space quick if you don't have a big enough room. Also, I guess in space that would also be acoustics and treatment and everything else. So when I started working in this room, this is the bonus room of my house because I didn't start with nowhere near as much gear as I got now. So of course I had a little bit of gear acquisition syndrome, but it's for a good reason. Okay, so space. 2, weight. This stuff can start to get heavy quick. The racks can start to get heavy. The console's definitely heavy. So you run into that issue. And the last con for me, out of all of it, would be wiring. And trying to make the wiring neat. I got so many wires trying to wire all this gear up that it's kind of like it's overwhelming, because I still need more wiring, more cables. I still need more cables. I still got to get a lot more insert cables. I'm like, oh, because I got to get the insert cables per channel. You're talking, this is a 48 channel, so guess how many insert cables I got to get? I got to get 48 insert cables. I only got 8 of them right now. I got to get another 48 because I got 8 on my bus channels right now. That's for the insert, so I can insert, so I can start chaining stuff per channel for the outboard gear. on top of that, it's just the amount of cables. You could probably see right here alone. That's nothing but cables hanging off the board. You don't even want to see the nightmare of cables that are running behind the racks of gear. It's so many cables because you got to hook all the gear up. In recording studios, most of that stuff is ran to the racks, but it's ran through the floor, through holes in the rack where you can't see it. It's nice and neat. They'll run stuff through the walls, under the floor and everything, so it's nice and neat. But I mean, recording studios have a lot of cables, which can be a nightmare because cables, and I'm still buying cables. I'm still buying cables. So those are the 3 cons: space, weight, and cable. There could be more cons, like, for example, cost. Obviously, buying hardware costs more than buying software in some instances. Now, with that being said, those are the cons. Now, here's the pros. The pros is having the outboard gear changes the way you would work in your studio environment. And most people that have consoles, outboard gear, and so forth, along with working in your DAW plugins, most people actually, when it gets somewhat set up like that, they tend to like to use outboard gear because you can actually physically touch knobs, faders. You can physically touch stuff instead of always mousing, and you can't, with a mouse and all that and the plugin, you really can't touch the plugin. Now, that's why a lot of people end up getting like stuff like this. I know this fader port's outdated, but it's a fader port. It's a controller, right? But if you think about it, this is why people want to they buy fader ports or MIDI controllers or whatever, because at least they can touch something than always being with a keyboard and a mouse. This is the reason why some people they mainly may have the monitor, the computer speaker, the computer monitor, or your studio monitors, and your mouse and keyboard with the interface and the usual, but they also sometimes have some sort of physical, some sort of control to touch something. So that's, so the pros to having an actual console and outboard gear is that you can physically touch something, and it actually changes the way, and it does give you a sense of working in a commercial studio type of feel. It does somewhat feel like I'm working in a commercial building, even though this is just a bonus room. It does feel like that in here, even though it can feel kind of cramped. The space in here is tight, but it still has that commercial studio feel to it. 2, analog sonics, meaning the sound. When you run stuff through real gear, your ears become trained to actually hear it. You can actually hear the difference between running stuff through analog gear versus running it through a plug-in. There are a lot of people that will swear up and down that you cannot tell the difference between plugins and analog. I'm like this. These people that swear like that are not working on analog gear. They're justifying why they should stay in the box and use software and plugins. But sonically, like for me, when I run stuff from the interface through all the channels and run stuff through the gear, I can hear the difference. And I've proven that when I made my Behringer videos, that stuff is running through it's running through an analog console through some outboard gear. Not everything is completely analog. There are some plugins in the play, but believe me, and the reason why it sounds because it's running through analog gear. Not saying the analog is the be all, know all, and you can't get great results in just using plugins, and you can actually can. It'll just sound a little different. Not saying both will sound better than the other. One just sounds better than the other. It's like no different than If you go to one recording studio, it has an API console and outboard gear. You go to this studio that has an SSL and outboard gear. Each studio can sound good, but in a different way. It's kind of like a Nikon versus a Canon versus a Fuji versus whatever type of camera and different lenses, whatever. The photos can be a little bit different, but it all can still look good. Same thing with studios. So that is number 2. And finally, other than, you know, the sonic, analog sonics, and physically touching stuff, I think the third pro, and this is the last pro for it, is it's the atmosphere created when you have an actual studio. It's the atmosphere of it. It's unexplainable. Believe it or not, my creativity becomes different working here than people see me do videos where I'm doing downstairs, or even my tiny setup where I just have just an interface, a controller. It's the ideal small, bare minimum setup. But when I'm doing stuff in that, and I hadn't done very much because I have a more, it's creased this, I want to do more when I'm up here because I have a lot more to work with, if that makes sense. Some people may not feel that way, but I feel that way. It's kind of like, even if you go into Steve, whether you're into rap, rock, R&B, country, jazz, whatever, and you watch a lot of these artists, and they're in these commercial studios, and they're sitting there at the console, or the vibe changes, especially when you're in there and you're with a couple of other people, a couple of engineers, some other musicians. The environment, the atmosphere. So that would be, I would say, the other pro. It's just the work, the feel of it. Especially when I'm sitting here on the console and I'm running music through the console, and everything I'm doing through the console, it just, the way it sounds, the atmosphere of it, and, you know, the physical touching stuff, patching gear in, physically patching in gear, and then looking at the hardware units, you can see the LED meters moving, and you can see meters moving and lights flickering. A lot of times we don't see that with our plugins because we minimize or get our plugins out of the way so we can look at the DAW. So a lot of times we can't even see the plugins working. We may be somewhat hear the plugins working, but a lot of times we can't see unless you click on it to get out of screen. Or you can try to 2 or 3 screens and move out the way, but then your screen start to become cluttered with 10, 15, 20, 30 different plugins, and you're trying to shift plugins around or look at them or whatever. Well, the nice thing about actually looking at real gear is you can actually, I don't have to move the gear out the way to see if it's working. I can just turn around and look at it. I can look at it. Oh yeah, I see the lights working, or I see the needles moving. I can see where the gear is working. That's the pro of it. So that's going to be my take on the 3 pros and 3 cons. So if you're building your studio, you make a decision as the cons. Are they going to outweigh the pros, or will the pros outweigh the cons? Sometimes one or the other is a deal breaker for people that like the way they work in their workflow environment. Some people do not want to work because of the cons. Other people want to work in this type of environment because of the pros. It's kind of like, that's how I look at it. So that's going to do it for this video. I would love to hear people's thoughts on that. Some people might not have thoughts because they never got a chance to work in this type of environment. This type of environment, before I built my own home studio, is what I've always known and seen, including the studios I've been in, and all the mixed magazines that I've read, and all the home studio recording magazines, and just the way studio was done in recording studios has always been the commercial studio environment. So I guess I'm a little biased. Actually, I'm a lot biased to that. But just because I'm biased doesn't mean I'm right. I don't think I'm wrong, but I'm definitely not right at everything, or my way isn't law. Just like a commercial studio setup is not law, because no commercial studio is alike. They all choose different gear to get the same results. So that's going to do it for this video. I want to hear people's comments on it. And what do you think? Thanks for watching. Y'all have a great one.